Empower People works for disadvantaged women
Hello
who are
everyone,
victims
good
or
evening,
potential
namaste.
victims of violence,
Welcome back
including domestic violence, honor crimes, killing, and trafficking or other type of slavery, and provides them shelter, proper counseling, legal support, and other help required. The community work involves creating awareness and conducting livelihood programs.
Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome back to episode 2 of Psych Talk, जो कि एक वेबिनार सीरीज है पार्ट ऑफ सोसाइटी टुडे। आज हम लेके आए हैं एक बहुत ही इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक विच इज मेंटल हेल्थ एज सोशल जस्टिस इशू, which is in continuation to our previous episode of myth busting, wherein we spoke about how the mental health issues are not just confined to the individual experiencing them. So today, myself, Shivani, and I have with me Sumati. Both of us are psychology students, and we will be speaking about the different factors that are assigned to the mental health as social justice issue. So, Sumati, probably you can explain to us what exactly the concept of social justice is. Over to you. Sumati, your mic is muted. Could you please unmute? Yeah.
Sorry. Shivani, thank you so much for the introduction. Okay, so what mental health is and what does viewing mental health from a social justice perspective mean? So basically, we brought this session for you to help have a better understanding of the mental health. What we see mental health as, and it largely remains at a very individualistic level. What I mean by that is that our mental health that exists doesn't exist in an isolation where it only impacted by our own experiences, but from a specific social location that exists within this society, within this world, within this community, or within our own surroundings. So to acknowledge and have a better understanding of what can be the causes of distress and the difficulties that our individual faces, we need to see it in terms of how the society exists and how the different injustices within the society can impact the mental health, and hence the concept of social justice to see mental health as something that is also a product of and also interacts with these injustices, or how the society's structures and affect mental health of an individual. So, a social justice, the term social justice cover the aspects of inequalities and injustices within a system. So, what we mean and what we would like to bring about in this session is different factors. We will be talking about different factors. So moving on to the first factor. Over to you, Shivani, the social factor that impacts mental health.
Yeah, thank you, Sumati. You're extremely right. When somebody is going through some kind of a mental health issue or an illness, there are multiple factors to it that may be the cause. And as we have discussed in the past as well, that generally when a therapist or diagnoses someone with such issues, it is found that these issues are generally manifested in the form of multiple layers. So usually what is found is that the beginning of these issues, the roots are go right back to the childhood. So it is generally found that the personality, the major characteristics of an individual's personality are formed completely by the age of around 7 to 12, which is around sixth grade. So it is very important to understand that a lot of what affects an individual's personality and their vulnerability to different mental health illnesses and issues is already, the seeds are already sown in the childhood. And what is a very common source is the household patterns, which is one of the major social factors of mental health illness. So the kind of family background that an individual comes from, the kind of environment they grow up in. Let's say, for example, that an individual comes from a broken home wherein the parents are divorced or something like that. So when parents get divorced or if there are issues happening between the two parents, तो generally जो होता है कि जो बच्चा है वो पिसता है मम्मी और पापा के issues के बीच में. So that is a very common source, and generally we find that anxiety, depression, PTSD, these issues are very common, and people who come from broken homes are very vulnerable to these mental health illnesses. Also, if the parents are abusive, if the mother or the father or any relative for that matter is abusive towards a child or even towards a teenager, then it leads to the development of these illnesses, which if the intervention is done at an early stage, then it's well and good, and the person can, these things can be cured quite early. Otherwise, what happens is that this gets carried on to the adulthood of the person, when the person is in their mid 20s, early 20s, or their 30s. And sometimes what happens is that when a child does not receive good parenting, he or she may not be a good parent to their child. So it is a vicious cycle that keeps going on. So it is very important to consider this factor, which is the kind of household the individual is coming from. Other than that, it is very important to understand that there is this terminology that we used called self concept. What self concept is? Now, self concept means that how an individual is viewing themselves, what they think of themselves based on the kind of opinions and feedbacks they receive from the external people, from the people around them. It could be their friends, their family. So your judgment of yourself to a very large extent develops from the kind of feedback you receive, from the kind of stimulus, as we call it, you receive from your environment. So self concept again is a very important aspect of even a child and even an adult. So generally what we notice is that when especially in adolescence, कि जब बच्चा around 6th grade में या 5th grade में आ जाता है, तो it is becomes very important for them कि उनके friends में वो बहुत ही cool हो, or they get popular in school. So this is how they're viewed by their friends, especially at that age, is what affects them to a very large extent. And it can happen that peer pressure में आके ये बच्चे फिर they end up doing the wrong kind of things that could put them into trouble. And by trouble I mean that maybe trauma or some kind of an unhealthy toxic situation. So this can happen to adults as well. We live in a society wherein we need external validation and we always look for it. So it does happen so that if some people are doing something at a mass scale, even if you don't feel like doing it, or if you don't think it is right, you tend to do it just because अरे सब लोग कर रहे हैं तो मैं भी कर लेता हूँ और कर लेती हूँ. So peer pressure में आके this happens a lot. And again, this also reflects, it also manifests itself in other aspects, like, for example, career, other kind of relationships. So what happens is that a tension is created, stress is created in that person's mind. So if, for example, if the person experiences some kind of a failure, then he or she tends to, they tend to receive these critical judgmental remarks from their family, friends, other relatives, and basically from the society. So what happens is the self concept of that person is affected by that. So then, what happens is there are suicidal cases, there is depression, there is anxiety, there is PTSD, and all such kinds of things. It can manifest itself into different things, maybe drug abuse or anything like that. So this is what happens. Another kind of set of people who are usually troubled, I would say, is those who stay alone, especially in today's world where people have to move from their homes for their education or career or whatever. So what happens is they end up staying alone, with their roommates or whatever. तो इसमें क्या होता है कि when you're at home you kind of have the safety net, and when you move out you need to look for that safety net. All of a sudden you get exposed to these different things. So what happens is that you're already exposed to these different things, and then you end up
Uh, so yeah, where the Shivani left off, like she talked about the different aspects that in a childhood and as a child grows, with how are the different aspects or the environment around a child that affect or impact their psychological well-being or their mental health. So, moving on to the next factor that we talked about, and like it's an important social factor in terms of the class and caste structures that we have within the society, and that how does that affect the mental health or mental well-being of an individual. We understand that the fact or the very act of marginalization, what I mean by that is the discrimination or the otherization that these communities face in itself leads to some sort of emotional distress. Not some, but a huge emotional distress. On the other hand, the access to the support system or the care or the understanding that works as a fallback mechanism for individuals also get restricted by the very act of marginalization. What I mean by that is that these inequalities in terms of the caste structure or the class structure also affects the access to the health or the professional help that these individuals can seek also get restricted. It's not just in terms of help not being available, but the minute you see that you don't have any structure where you feel like you will go ahead and you will be feel understood, that's a feeling in itself that feels like entrapment, where you can't seek help, and when you can't reach out to individuals. So this very act of may lead to some sort of emotional distress and anxiety within the individual that these communities typically faces. So yeah, we have Shivani back. If Shivani would like to add anything to it also.
Yeah, thanks, Sumati, for taking the banner. I'm really sorry, I was facing some network issues. So, yeah, basically, what I was saying is that there are a lot of these, factors, a lot of these what we call as stimuli. When there is a lot of external information or external situations that affect you, we generally call it stimuli. So, जब ऐसे बहुत सारे स्टिमुलाई होते हैं एनवायरनमेंट में सोशल रीजंस की वजह से, बेसिकली कि कोई भी सोशल सिचुएशन की वजह से, या एनीथिंग लाइक दैट कि फैमिली है, फ्रेंड्स है, एनी अदर फॉर्म ऑफ सोसाइटी, इट कुड बी सोशल मीडिया एज वेल, कि जैसे साइबर बुलिंग होता है. सो अ लॉट ऑफ दीज सोशल सिचुएशंस जो कि डिस्ट्रेस ऐड करते हैं एक इंसान की लाइफ में. इट कुड बी इमोशनल डिस्ट्रेस, मेंटल डिस्ट्रेस, as Sumati mentioned. So what happens is that all these factors, they cause a lot of mental distress to a person, and it can increase their vulnerability to all these different mental illnesses, like depression, anxiety, which are generally very common in today's age because of the kind of exposure that we get. So it's a very common thing that people go through, and it's very unfortunate also. That a major role by this is played when you belong to a minority. You can say, like, when you have an opinion that belongs to the minority. If I were to be specific, there is an other side to this as well, which is the caste system, which Sumati will talk about in detail. But one aspect of this is when your opinion belongs to a minority. Like, if you are in a situation where maybe you are privileged, or if you have an opinion that is not carried by the other people to such a great extent, तो क्या होता है कि if you are basically disregarded for some reason, कि if you are facing something, then it's just kind of like an imitation, because it's people don't think that you fit in, so they don't give any regard or any value to your opinion. So if you are facing some kind of a problem, like we have seen this in a very recent example as well, wherein I would it so happens that the privileged are their issues are disregarded. So Sumati will talk about that in detail, if she would like to add to it.
Yeah, I added to that already.
Okay.
We were on there, but adding on more to it. Okay, so I would like to quote some Divya Kundukuri, who is a founder, who is also a founder member of the Blue Dawn, which is a mental health community for Bahujan communities. So the thing that she talked about is about how the mental health is viewed as something that is reserved for the privileged section, and this is something that only happens with the privileged individual because they have the access to seek professional help. And when the communities from marginalized section or people who have been historically oppressed complain of such issues, that is often seen as an imitation from the upper class people, when the reality exists in so that these people are exceptionally more vulnerable stage to these kind of issues and these kind of problems, because the problem of excess and the very act of marginalization that I also talked about. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Moving on to the next section. Yeah. So
Moving on to gendered factors. Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. So the gendered factors. Okay. How the gender factors affect mental health. I think gender has a huge role to play with the mental health of a person. For that, first we need to ask ourselves, what is gender? How we see gender is basically a social construct. What I mean by that is that the definition that exists for the gender is basically how a person psychologically feel, or how in a particular way they think, what they like or what they don't like, or how they like to express themselves. That is called gender expression. So these are the things that we typically associate with gender. But the idea of gender, when we say is a construct, is that there is nothing essentially masculine or essentially feminine that could be assigned to an individual, or assigned to an entire group, that could be said to have essentially feminine or essentially masculine. And I'm not here talking about the physical realities or the physical structures. I'm talking about the gender, that is the psychological aspect. Okay, so what becomes important here is that the traditional idea, like what is femininity? If wanting to have long hairs is what makes me feminine, or if wanting to have paint my nails, or if I am a soft-spoken person, or I move in a certain way, or I sit in a certain way, is these things essentially make me feminine? And if I like to do this, or if this is something that I cherish, is this I can apply to all females, that they will also like it? Is this essentially what being a female means? No, it's not that. It's basically a construct. It's constructed that it is what being female or being masculine for that matter means. So what does that this do? This does to the larger society. The way in which this gender exists is the traditional idea of the binaries, where there is a predefined and narrow expectation and rules from both the genders, both the binaries. And when the people don't conform or don't fit into uh, these uh, these roles or these expectations, they are constantly being pressurized, abused, or even we have all sorts of discrimination for them, to the extent that they in some cases also commit suicide. So the like for that matter, I will like to talk about one disorder, that is the gender identity disorder and the gender dysphoria. Okay, so the gender dysphoria, the idea of dysphoria is basically the distress that individual faces when their physical reality or the sex that these individuals have don't match with the psychological being that they feel, and the distress that these individuals feel because of this incongruency. So where this distress comes from, the distress that these individuals feel is seen as originating from within the individual. That is, that it originates from within the individual. They don't think right, or they don't think how they're supposed to think. So when I see that these individuals, like if I'm born a male and I think that way, and the society tells me that this is not how you're supposed to think, that this is the way you're supposed to think. So I feel this way, but there is a constant pressure around me, and pressure to conform to the binary, and pressure to, because I'm born a male or my sex is a male, I should think this way, and this is how men are supposed to think, and this is how the idea of masculinity exists. So this is how you're supposed to think, and because of this I feel distress. So is this distress that is originating within me, or is it the distress because the society, I think that way, but the society forces me to think this way? Is this the this distress that comes, my point is that this distress comes from the pressure that society puts upon these individuals to conform to the binary. So so it becomes important that we acknowledge that these realities of individual, and these illnesses that we talk about, these are result of a individual existing within a society, and the norms and the customs and the expectation within that society. So, and when we talk of the LGBT community, I don't want to talk about them in some otherized form, and that something existing from within a corner. It's pretty much us, and it's pretty much individuals who question their identity, question their orientations, and what they like and what they don't like. It's pretty much all of us. What we need to understand is that the level of oppression that becomes so high in a situation where you don't conform to the identities that you're assigned to at the time of the birth, and this will result in many complications within the minds of individuals. Okay, so moving on to the next point, that is the how it affects the gender minorities and non-binary folks. APA, the American Psychological Association, according to its data, that one in four women, as compared to 1 in 9 males. Uh, Second, just let me cross check this uh, data for,
Yeah, it's 1 in 10 males.
yeah, 1 in 10 males. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Shivani, you'd like to add to this point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you were saying about the American Psychological Association, you were right that one in every four women are found to have. Okay, so this data, to be clear, that this data is about the US, and but this data can be very easily extrapolated because, according to the other surveys done in the UK and even in Asia, it is found that this data is pretty much, on an average, it's the same. So, one in four women and one in 10 male are found to have some kind of a mental health illness, to be specific, not an issue. As we had explained earlier, that mental health illness and mental health issues are different. Illnesses are something that are clinical, and issues are something which are these temporary distress caused by any kind of an external situation or an event that may be happening in your life. So, um, according to this data, they found that one in four women are found to be experiencing these illnesses, and it is said that the reason because of this why women are more vulnerable and to these illnesses is because the kind of role women play in our society. Um, it's as Sumati mentioned that gender is just binary, it's masculine and feminine, and based on these masculine and feminine qualities and characteristics that we assign to gender, we also assign roles to these genders. So due to the kind of roles that women are assigned, they are idolized. The kind of roles they play, a woman is a mother, she's a sister, she's a friend, and she has to play all these roles. She has to multitask, she has to look after her family, she has to go work, earn a living. And even in case, as I mentioned earlier about divorced parents, so if a woman is a single mother, she has to look after her child, the finances, everything on her own. So it is expected that ठीक है, लड़की काम कर रही है, करने दो, पर उसको घर का भी काम करना है, उसको ये भी करना पड़ेगा, उसको वो भी करना पड़ेगा. Why? It is not the kind of effect that is created on the emotional and mental health of this woman. Her state of mind is really it's uh, people think people don't consider it, they don't think about it as much. So it does happen so that women are more vulnerable to these illnesses. But on the brighter side, to look at this from a different aspect, it is found that women are more open about these issues that they're facing, these illnesses, than men, and more women receive treatment compared to men. Now this is also based on the survey done by American Psychological Association. So the reason for this is because men, again, due to the toxic patriarchy of a society, are discouraged to express their, their feelings, their emotions, whatever it is they're going through. It could be stress at workplace or stress due to any other family issue. It could be stress due to social factors or any other kind of sources. So men are, they're told to man up, and they're told to, not they're discouraged from expressing all this. So what they do is they bottle all this up, and in order to escape from these issues, what they do is they resort to different methods like drug abuse. So again, it was found that alcohol abuse, marijuana abuse, all this is very common in men than in women. Because generally, what we women do is we have our best friends, we talk to them about it, and then we just cry it off or whatever, and we're fine after that, right? We're comparatively okay. But men don't do that because they're told that if they do that, then they're not men. So so that because of that reason, the statistics is really disappointing. And again, all these social factors and all these gendered factors play a huge role in the way we perceive mental illness for different communities. When it could be in terms of gender, in terms of caste, in terms of race, and the way we perceive these, and also the way we the way we think about it, the way we approach it when it comes to treatment. A lot of people don't even consider getting therapy because they feel that it's not a big deal, So it again, the kind of roles that we have assigned to these genders because of the entire patriarchy thing that we have in our society plays a huge role in the mental health of both men, women, and even the non-binary genders that we have. Yeah, Sumati, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, a little point that of like how this gender uh, how this gender minorities being viewed, and how this diagnosis and the illnesses that we have, like borderline personality disorder, something that is very easily overdiagnosed in females and non-binary folks. So why is that so? Because the gendered expectation and gender exist in a certain way that there is a increased vulnerability of sexual and physical abuse towards these gender and these gender minorities. And when I say minority, not in terms of the numbers, but the term in which they are viewed in a society and how much say they have within the society. So, so because as these illnesses can't be seen as originating from within, or originating that have a origin that we can also assign it, see it in a way that it's an intergenerational thing, or how the trauma is in itself passed on from generation to generation, but it's also a result of the realities that we have. It's always the both, and at no point in time, we the whole point of this session was that the onus of uh, getting through this illnesses is not can't be placed entirely on the individual, that it's their fault because of that they got this illnesses, but the realities and these injustices that exist around us make us prone to these illnesses and these disorders. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, so moving on to the next factor that we have, economic factor that impact mental health. Yeah, Shivani. Okay.
Yeah, rightly said, Sumati. So, again, just like other factors that we have just discussed, economic factors are also really important in the role that they play. So, generally what happens is that those who are behind are left behind, and those who are moving ahead, generally they just move on. So again, this plays a huge role. It manifests itself into financial issues. What happens is that sometimes people who are not who don't have an opportunity to have good education, and in the end what happens is that they don't have the kind of opportunities in terms of career like the other privileged people do. So what happens is that these people, they end up having financial issues. Sometimes they're debted, like in debt for their entire lives, and the debt gets it goes to the next generation. So it does happen so in a lot of communities, like for example in agriculture, right? So uh, farmers, they pass on their debts, and it's not by choice. They have no other option. It's an inevitable situation for them. So similarly, there are many other such communities that or many other such individuals or families that they have these inevitable financial issues, and because of these issues eventually they end up having physical illnesses, and all this, it leads to mental illnesses also. It leads to stress. In many cases what happens is that um, when these financial issues cannot be resolved, so what happens is that parents become abusive, or men become abusive towards their wives, or they become abusive towards their kids. So what happens is that it gets passed on. So it's very right what Sumati mentioned, that we need to ask ourselves that is it that individual's fault entirely? No, these are the different inevitable situations that happen to them that lead to all these mental illnesses and other problems in their lives and the entire distress, emotional, mental distress. So what happens is that even when they're going through all this, sometimes it does happen so that they know that they need help, they need therapy, but because they cannot afford therapy, they don't go and get it. They do not consult a professional. So what happens is that they keep going through that ordeal because they do not see any other way out. So similarly, as the current situation, for example, the pandemic, many people have lost their jobs, many people have faced salary cuts, and those who didn't have jobs, who knows what will happen to them, right? So uh, all these financial situations, they play a huge role, and they are a huge problem when it comes to mental illness. And again, another example of such situation is when we have a carer, when some individual is taking care of, the entire family is dependent on that individual. He or she is the bread earner. Okay, so maybe it's possible that they have a person of older age, or a person with special abilities. So what happens is that these people are not only financially dependent on the bread earner or the responsible person of the society, they're also emotionally and mentally dependent. So what happens is that this person who's might be the sole responsible member of the family might get burned out in the process of taking care of these people, looking after them. And they don't have anybody else to talk to, is what I because I have seen such situations wherein people, they do not have anybody else to talk to, and even if they do, they don't, because they don't see any point in doing that for some reason. So what happens is that in such situations, again, the carer of the family ends up in such traumatic situations, in such emotional distress. So it's very important to seek therapy, and if you're not able to do that because of whatever reason, financial reason, then it's very important to reach out. There are many toll free numbers, there are many other services that are provided even by the government. So we'll be mentioning those links, like we have done for the past webinars as well. We'll be mentioning those when we post this webinar. So please reach out, whatever it is. And yeah, so moving on, Sumati, would you like to add anything to this aspect of how mental health is affected?
Okay, sorry, I was mute. I was on mute. Okay, yeah. So, just a small point. I think you have covered pretty much everything. So, yeah, like how the crisis or the disaster or the system that we call the climate apathy, how the economic factors affect some people more than other people, and those some people often constitute the poor marginalized people. Why is that so? Because we also have ample examples, and even in the current situation, even in the disasters like cyclone that we have, and even the COVID-19 situation, who are the most sufferers of this crisis and the climate changes that we have? The point that becomes important is that even these access to the resources and the mental health services get restricted because of the economic factor, and that too leads to the emotional distress that these individual faces. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah. Okay, so
Yeah.
moving on to the next factor, that is the political factors that impact mental health. One thing that becomes important here is also that the factors that we talked about, we categorize them in four boxes because for the ease of understanding. But at no point in time they are exclusive terms, or they are exclusive of each other. These are the things that reality exists, and it's often overlapped. Caste and class affect the economy affects policies, and politics affect economy. So these are all related terms, and one affect other or the vice versa. So similarly, even the topic of climate crisis or the climate apartheid is something that is a political crisis. That is something that affects poor more than it affects rich. Rich have resources to escape the situation, have the resources uh, to sustain the problems of these disasters. The poor are who bear the burn most. So, moving on to the next topic, the rise of xenophobia. What is xenophobia? Xenophobia is basically the fear of unknown. हम उनसे डरते हैं जिन्हें हम समझते नहीं हैं और जिन्हें हम जानते नहीं. This is basically the root of xenophobia. So the thing is that this is something also that uh, politicians also exploit on. So the thing is, अगर हम किसी को देखते हैं जो कि जिनको हम लेबल करते हैं अदराइज्ड, दूसरे की तरह या दूसरे लोगों की तरह, so the thing is that we often have stereotypes, we often have labels, we often have generalization for them. And what has also become important is to understand that within a context, we might be a community and we might be a majority per se, but within the other context, we might become that other person and we might become that other individual. So this constant rise of xenophobia is something that is detrimental to the health of the people that we otherize and help to the mental health of the people against these stereotypes that we label upon. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Moving on to the next factor is that of like how these political factors often branch out in terms of the wars or conflicts or the refugee crisis. These things pretty much are the major reason of the post-traumatic stress that individual faces. What is that? If a person experiences a traumatic event that doesn't vanish there, it persists and it's have long-term implication. Even on the short term, they experience this post-traumatic stress that is the stress due to the traumatic event that they face. The burnt houses, the lost lives, the fear of being constantly being having those nightmares again and again, and these are the things that isn't something that within the individual's control or individual's owners to handle such conflicts, but these are pretty much created injustices and pretty much the political factors that affect the mental health of an individual. So yeah, and even in these crises, the excess and the even the basic requirements, if I talk about the detention centers and the crisis that happened there, even in the Assam, the separation from the families and friends, which is basically what constitute our self-concept, constitute our most intimate relations or most which provides us the support system. Even when that is also taken away, the level of the emotional distress that these individual faces, or the level of or the fear of deportation or fear of for their even their lives, they don't know if they're ever going to escape that situation in the first place. So these are some of the factors that also affect how a person feels uh, inside their head. Yeah, so that's it. Yeah. Okay, so Shivani, if you have anything to add to that, and we can then move on to the question.
No, yeah, I think we can move on to the question. You've covered up pretty much most of almost everything. Actually, you've covered up everything. So we can take up questions. I think we have one question from one of our viewers. Um, yeah, what would be a perfect culture which will help to grow the perfect psychology at an early age? So this is actually a really good question.
There is
Yeah.
nothing like a perfect environment or a perfect uh, situation that can exist. It's always like we can. It's always an attempt to minimize the distresses and stresses that are born due to the injustices within the society that we talked about, this class structure, the caste structure, which pretty much marginalize people, which pretty much adds to the and these toxic norms within the gender. So these are the things that provide us the direction in which we as a mental health professionals, and also in terms of society and government policy, what they need to aim at and how we need to look at these illnesses. But there is nothing that exists within a say a perfect environment. It can be a healthy environment, but there is nothing like a perfect environment. So yeah, stresses do exist and there is no escape to the stresses, but these stresses are not in terms of like these are natural, but these are man-made. These are the larger bond structure, bond problems, injustice occurring out of the society. So yeah, that's it. If that's covers your answer, Shivani, if you have anything more to add.
Yeah, as you rightly mentioned, there can be a healthy environment
Yeah.
created, but there cannot be an ideal environment because see, it's a very fine line actually. Because generally, a lot of parents tend to do is they try to keep like a tab of every move that their kids make, like कहाँ जाता है, क्या करता है, किससे मिलता है, क्या बातें करता है, all of that. So what happens is you end up uh, uh, being a parent with immense control issues. And then what happens is you need to understand that there first of all there has to be really good communication between you and whoever that could be your kid or whoever. So there has to be really good communication first of all, because only then will that bond or that trusting bond will be established. It can be anybody, any loved one of yours. So since you are specific here of early age, I would talk about kids. So it's very important to have that friendly and trusting bond. But at the same time, you need to make sure that you are enabling your child to make their own decisions. So that healthy boundary has to be drawn, and that is in the control of the parents. So it's of course, as Sumati mentioned, that you need to be very aware of the kind of um, society, the structure of the environment that the kid is getting exposed to, the kind of law that is at as at your use. So you need to be aware of all these things and act accordingly, because generally what ends up happening is we end up having these extremely paranoid parents that want to control their children all the time. So that really is not possible. So it's a very fine line, and that balance has to be there. So I think that is one way in which you can create that healthy environment. Other than that, there are a lot of stressors that will not be in our control completely, as Sumati mentioned. So really, it has to be, being aware mostly of what kind of situations the individual is getting exposed to. So accordingly, then measures can be taken to, control it or take whatever measures are required for that. Yeah.
And we will urge the audience, if you have any questions, you can comment on this video and we will take this up. Yeah. What would be the different ways? You can't read it properly. Yeah. What would be the different ways we can create a healthy atmosphere at home apart from the neighborhood or the larger scale, like countries, apart from neighborhood or larger scales like countries or world? So, at an individualistic level, yeah. So, at an individualistic level, it's always advisable to have open atmosphere in terms of having safe spaces where you can express and let others express as well. And if Shivani, you also like to add to this.
Yeah. I just wanted to add one thing that I think an healthy atmosphere would look like, of course, where you can express yourself, and also where you have healthy and adult-like conversations about the topics that we just discussed. We notice a lot in Indian society that parents refrain or relatives refrain from talking about um, the LGBTQ or things, such things that are very normal are they are stigmatized and considered as taboo. So it's very important to talk and in a very healthy conversation about all these things, so that an awareness is created and a very healthy attitude is created. And maybe if somebody is going through that, they can also feel that liberty to express themselves. So yeah, that was just like an add on to what you said. So yeah.
Yeah, and also about like how like these are the things at a personal level and uh, individual level at a healthy society and what healthy society constitutes. So some of the problems that we discussed about and how like to identify the roots and how where this distress is coming from. Like if I talk about the LGBT community or if I talk about the gender difficulty problems that exist and the various illnesses and issues that individuals suffer because of it. So first we need to tackle the issue of gender in itself, an issue of the this toxic expectations and norms, and which is con- pretty much so much overburdening that our lives are defined by it. So yeah, so having an open conversation and having a pretty much open environment towards acceptance and non-judgmental safe spaces within the society and within these spaces where we accept individuals for who they are and things that they can't have choice about, like something that is something that they basically are. So yeah, so these are the steps that like these are the factors that are problems that we located, and these are like not a solution that if one day we talk about and second day we have solution and everything is just solved. These are the systematic problems and these are structural problems and these are something that have a historical baggage and an historical context in which they have been carried forward through generation. We definitely have need to have more discourses, more understanding and more discussions like this about this, and even within the I think our textbooks also focuses a lot on individualistic level, basically because our textbook is also a lot taken from the west, and the they largely focus on the individualistic care centric aspect, and so yeah, so we need to dig deeper, we need to um, unlayer these uh, causes of these distress, which are pretty much the injustices that exist within this society. So uh, yeah.
Yes,
So Mani, do you want to introduce what we have for the next session?
yes. So, in continuation to our current episode and even the previous one, we will be coming with on next Monday with an episode on what are the common mental health issues and illnesses that affect the different age groups. So, generally, what happens is that during childhood or during adolescence, during adulthood or during old age. So at these are the different four age groups that we categorize when we study human behavior and development throughout the lifespan of an individual. So at these different age groups, there are vulnerabilities towards these different illnesses that we will be talking about in the next episode. And I guess we do not have any more questions, so it would be safe to conclude today's episode by saying that although the individuals have the right to make decisions and control make decisions and control their environment and their personal lives, And even though individuals experience mental health issues, it's very important to understand that there are many things that cannot be controlled by an individual, and these are the sources. The sources of this is what is happening in our society from an economic, political, or a gender point of view. And all of these go hand in hand, all of these are intertwined. So it is very important to be aware and understand how they function and where we fall in this entire structure.
Thank you, Shivani. So yeah, we will see you. Yeah, we will see you next week on Monday. So thanks for joining us and bearing us. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, we'll say bye bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye bye. Good night.
Almost all of us want to do something for the larger society and try to give back to our people. But we all have limitations. We see and feel for people in difficult circumstances, and we also know that the lives of people living in extreme poverty and in difficult conditions are inevitably bound with our own lives and identities. Let's come together, speak your mind, share your ideas, and together we can work to improve the lives of people in need. Join us for online meetings. Let's discuss and plan the way forward. As shall you use your expertise, so shall others, and together we can truly make a difference. Our target is to rescue women in slavery, women who are bought and sold like products in the market for the purpose of marriage, women who are then mistreated and abandoned to their own devices due to lack of support from the family, the community, and society at large. They constitute a new generation of the oppressed. A denial of their basic human rights is the biggest threat to our development and sustainability as a species. As a first step, simply come and register at our website www.empowerpeople.in. Our team will get in touch with you. We look forward to seeing you join hands, hearts and minds with us. Add in your bid to keep the flame of compassion, service and humanity alive.